supply chain. Let's start that again. Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Smith, President and CEO of Airlink, and I'll be your host for today's session, Aviation Cares, the COVID-19 Supply Chain Resiliency Roundtable. Now, we've got a fairly large and geographically diverse audience today, so thank you to all of you, including a number of our speakers calling in from rather unsociable hours. And so 1 year ago, we hosted a session to discuss the challenges of distributing COVID-19 vaccines, and there were many. We're now bringing together some key actors in the global aviation and logistics industry to talk about how they've achieved their successful delivery programs, not just of vaccines, but also of critical supplies and medical workers to fight COVID-19. Now, before we go too much further, I want to say a little bit of housekeeping. We are going to mute all of the participants so that we can keep the audio lines open for the speakers. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and so please type in questions as we go, and I'll address those, and we'll come to a portion later where we'll talk about some of those questions. As you've probably heard as you logged in, the session is being recorded, and we'll make it available after the session today. So for those who are not familiar with Airlink, here's a quick recap of what we do. We're a rapid response NGO that provides free of charge or discounted airlift for relief workers and aid supplies during humanitarian emergencies. And that's both man-made and natural. And we've been doing this for 10 years, having now, because of our partners, a number of them on the call today, moved over 4.3 million pounds of supplies, 8,000 responders across almost 100 humanitarian situations. And we estimate we've saved the nonprofit community more than $14 million. That's $14 million that they can put into their programs on the ground and to focus and do more with the resources that they have. Now, in early 2020, like many of you, we found ourselves at the forefront of the pandemic response as air capacity dwindled, prices rose, and recognizing the phases of the response that we were likely to incur, we crafted a 4-phase program called AviationCARES. And the CARES part is coordinated air response for emergency supplies. Now, the aim of this program was really twofold. One was to support the communities in crisis, experiencing and being affected by COVID-19. But the second aim was to highlight and support the aviation sector that was itself struggling, but continued to give and continues to give today. And specifically, for this program, our operational goals were, and they continue to be, 1, identify and build a credible pipeline for cargo and healthcare responders for the COVID-19 response. Number 2, bolster the healthcare systems in higher risk areas. We've seen this before, where not just COVID, but all other manner of medical and health issues bring down the entire system. We've seen that happen, and we continue to see that happen. But at number 3, it doesn't matter how bad COVID gets, natural disasters will continue. And so as a community, we need to make sure that we're prepared for those. And so that was really the third element there. And so over the past 20 months, this response has grown to encompass almost every corner of the world, reaching 45 countries with pandemic supplies. And Airlink's now moved over 10 million pieces of protective gear in 100 shipments, totaling more than 1.1 million pounds of cargo or weight. And we've also supported the transportation of 152 relief workers, which is significant in such an unprecedented time of challenging travel. And all told, we work shoulder to shoulder with the aviation logistics sector to help 42 nonprofits save more than almost $4 million in transportation costs. And I think one of the biggest and most important numbers is that we've helped over 10 million people with the programs that we've supported and with the partners on this call. So we're currently engaged in COVID-19 responses in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and supporting other regions in the aftermath of disasters like the recent flooding in the US West Coast and Canada, and now, as of the last couple of days, the tornadoes across the United States. Now, we couldn't have achieved any of this without our great partners, and we have three of them here today with us. From IATA, we have Brendan Sullivan, the Global Head of Cargo. Hey, Brendan, it's good to see you. From DHL, we have Thomas Ellman, the VP of Clinical Trials within their Logistics and Public Sector Group. Hey, Thomas. And United Airlines, we have Nicole Lee, the Director of Social Optimization within their Global Community Engagement Group. Now, we did have, unfortunately, we had Guillaume Hallou with Qatar Airways, the Chief Cargo Officer, but unfortunately had a last-minute conflict, but we'll make sure that we include him next time around. So, as a sector, we've learned a lot this year, and it's vital we take these lessons learned and apply to current and future operations. As it would seem, this will continue to go on for some time, with the most recent example of the Omicron variant. Now, so in terms of format, I'm going to cut to the speakers here for 7 to 10 minutes each to share some information, and then we'll open the floor to our roundtable discussion. So, Brendan, I'd like to start with you, please, if that's okay. And, the aviation sector, I can attest to personally, is a tremendously generous sector in their desire to support humanitarian efforts and continue to fly vast amounts of vaccines and other COVID supplies around the globe. So if you would, I know you have a couple of slides, talk to us a little bit about how the aviation sector is stepping up and what you're seeing.
Sure, absolutely. Maybe the first thing to start with is the fact that this particular pandemic and the immediate and very sharp impact on capacity is the deepest cut ever experienced in aviation and the longest lasting of its kind. So we continue to struggle with the pandemic, as you mentioned, the Omicron variant, the response then from governments, which has not been harmonized up until now, and continues not to be harmonized, has led to flight cancellations and even some routes further reducing or coming backwards where they've maybe been showing positive signs. So the COVID-19 pandemic has really tested the resilience of the aviation industry as a whole. And when it comes to air cargo, the industry was extremely well prepared and has been and continues to be successful in what really amounts to the largest coordinated movement of vaccines ever. So I think that is just something that we need to say and be proud of. We were taxed incredibly in terms of the aviation infrastructure, and yet the community was able to come together and pull off this huge effort. If you want to move into the next slide or the first slide, one of the things that came out very, very quickly is the value to society that aviation has, that air cargo plays. And not that it was unknown before, this value was always there. It wasn't new. However, I think a magnifying glass was shone on air cargo. Air cargo is critical. We just take a look at landlocked countries. There are, in many cases, no other ways of getting access to vital goods. And in the case of COVID-19, you could be looking at personal protection equipment all the way through to the vaccines and really everything in between, all the healthcare products that are needed. Air cargo also is incredibly well suited for time and temperature sensitive products. I mean, that's kind of, it is the fastest way of getting anything from one point to another over long distances. And it is also one excellent way of maintaining connectivity between these different countries. What we saw very early on was the countries and the aviation sector coming together and making sure that connectivity stayed as much as possible. So working with countries to ensure that borders remained open, that there were not unnecessary restrictions on crews, and that was honestly a challenge throughout this period. What IATA was able to do very early on was bring together a number of these different stakeholders. We worked with UNICEF, COVAX, and others to pull together the airlines and make sure that people were in a position to know who to talk to in order to collaborate, in order to actually maintain connectivity. We look at these air bridges that were established. Then from that establishment, very, very quickly we saw the first movements of goods, and the industry really stepping up and making sure that they could continue to do that. And maybe one of the last things to mention on this part, on the value to society and what aviation brings, it is huge benefit to countries, right? We look at travel and tourism and trade numbers. And one thing that's been demonstrated and maybe shone a light on is the fact that actually trade can generate more revenue for a country than tourism. And so as they look at all this connectivity disappearing, no passengers, but some continued cargo movements, they start to see how just important air cargo was and continues to be, and how they may wish to shape that kind of moving forwards. If you want to move to the next slide, the other sort of component, and we have some cargo airlines who are our members, and they've been dedicated to cargo and freight transportation as their core business model. But we also have a number of mixed carriers who operate passenger model and carry in the belly. Obviously, passenger revenues dropped. That's the red line you see on the screen. So it dropped extremely drastically. But the share of airline operating revenues, normally air cargo for these mixed carriers, typical mixed carriers, air cargo represents about 10 to 15% of their operating revenue. It was a third in 2020. It continues in 2021, should end right around there. Obviously, that should come back down as passenger numbers start to return. But airlines saw air cargo as a lifeline, and indeed it was for many of them. And allowed them to kind of continue to operate in that space. And I think that was really important for a number of airlines, that they were able to continue to operate. They were able to then provide value to the societies that I mentioned, be able to move around the critical goods. That in 2020, air cargo moved 750,000 tons of PPE by trade. Huge volumes of PPE, a little bit less into 2021, but still, I think the number when we met in October at our World Cargo Symposium was still around 150,000 tons in that year. Face masks, protective gowns, face shields, and so on and so forth. Really critical that moved around. Without it, there were many countries that simply weren't opening up at all. They weren't going to open up businesses or allow movement of people. And air cargo obviously was in the spotlight to be able to deliver that. I know we've got some questions a little bit later on, and I'm keen to hear from some of the other speakers as well. So, I mean, essentially, in a nutshell, air cargo was extremely successful, continues to be extremely successful, but challenged throughout the pandemic. And to be honest, continues to be challenged. We're in a peak season, a peak period. The capacity has not come all the way back online, although there is some easing in certain markets. And so there is still quite a lot of challenge ahead of us. But yeah, if you want to move to the next slide, just thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and I look forward to joining the panel session later.
Great, thanks, Brendan. Great, and yeah, absolutely became a lifeline, right? Not just to the airlines, but to communities around the world with these life-saving supplies. Nicole, great to see you. United Airlines is a leader on many fronts, a cornerstone partner for Airlink, not just in the COVID fight, but across all global humanitarian responses we get engaged with, and instrumental to Airlink's response to the Delta variant in India. And what did we work together for over £300,000 of relief supplies? And this year alone, I can't believe we're in December of this year. It's amazing how time flies. No pun intended. United has supported 16 responses on 5 different continents. for 750 responders, and that's just true and with Airlink. But broadening out the lens, Nicole, tell us a little bit about about your role in United's approach in general, and what you've accomplished over the last year, 20 months. It would be great to hear that.
Well, Steve, thanks for having me. It's good to see you and good to see everybody on the call here. I work in a group called Global Community Engagement, and through the work that we do, we essentially manage the company's footprint around nonprofit and community engagement. And we're guided by 4 giving pillars, one of which is lifting up communities in crisis after disaster. And that is the core of the work that we've been doing with Airlink really since the beginning. And I'm really proud of that fact. We met Airlink when it was still ISTAT Airlink during the Haiti earthquake now over a decade ago. And I've been really pleased to see the growth in the organization. Airlink is our go-to partner when it comes to disaster response. Literally is our first phone call is to Stephanie on your team, Dawn on our team. We're sort of fast friends and best friends that way. And you're right. I mean, as I think back on, we're entering a 3rd year of this pandemic, and that's rather mind-blowing to me. When I got the invitation to participate in this panel, I was thinking about what we would share. And as far as this COVID response, because I wrote a note down, Brendan, while you were speaking about how critical air cargo is, not just to airlines, but to the world, especially when folks are landlocked, when, truckers aren't moving, and that still causes issues for us as a cargo provider as well. But from the beginning, and the way United views its engagement in the community with humanitarian response is that we help where we can, right? So we leverage our aircraft and our network to the best of our ability. Now we're limited in the fact that we are a passenger airline, so we've got to fly there, and the space that we have on aircraft is also limited. And cargo was one of the main ways that we sort of survived the pandemic financially, along with a lot of assistance from the government. But cargo really did help us. And for those of you on the call today who aren't aware, I mean, really, we shifted focus. We converted some of our aircraft from passenger aircraft to cargo only flights, and we did a lot of those. And a lot of that in the beginning was for COVID relief supply, so PPE. Early on, before anything was closing down here in the U.S., we assisted China in sending some respirators, some equipment from the US over to China. So we've done a lot of PPE. When India and the Delta variant hit there, that was probably our largest response, I would say, from a coordinated perspective, because we're the only US carrier that at the time flew between the US and India. And we mobilized that very quickly. And I think that went on for a while, Steve. I know, we very quickly set up a response system, not only to accommodate requests that were coming in from all over. You can imagine the India diaspora, especially here in the United States, looking for resources to send equipment back to loved ones and organizations on the continent there. In addition to that, though, we also, as I mentioned, we're a passenger airline as well, so we flew doctors and medical teams as well. In year 1 of the COVID, it was sending volunteer medical staff to places like New York and New Jersey. We also did a significant number of medical teams into Native American reservations as well on the West Coast. And where we've had the need, we've been accommodating. And I know, Steve, that Airlink has, I think, primarily been focused on the cargo piece of it for COVID relief. But as you said, we've also had things like hurricanes and floods and earthquakes all in the midst of that, right? So that need doesn't stop either. So for us as an airline, it really is balanced against what we're able to do within the bounds of keeping ourselves afloat as well. While we would love to be able to help and say yes to every single request that comes through, we really do have to weigh that against our ability to continue to provide a lot of these free services. I'm going to just kind of pause there, and we can answer some more of the questions later in the Q&A. But really, that's the crux of what we've been doing, and it's cargo. We've also raised money through our customers and our employees. I guess that's the one thing that I can end on, which is sort of the third component of this. So it's cargo and passengers, but we're also raising money through our customers, our very generous customers, through offering bonus miles for cash contributions when they're needed the most.
That's great. Thanks so much, Nicole. And you know, you're a great partner. And yeah, I mean, I think that's the one thing, you know, is always never lost on me, is that you know, we talk about airlines and planes and whatever else, route networks, but actually, you know, what are airlines? Well, they're people, right? And just the passion of the aviation sector is really tremendous. And so thank you for everything you guys are doing. So Thomas, I think this is the first time you know, we've met. It's great to meet you. I know I think you said you're based in Germany and German origin, so we can still be friends, I think.
Absolutely.
So now, since the beginning of the pandemic, you know, we've worked together, our organizations, and we've moved what I think 26 different shipments to hard to reach destinations. I appreciate, you know, the scale of your operation. That's you know, a small amount, but it's been significant to reach destinations like the DRC, Malawi, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and some new destinations for Airlink like Madagascar and Zambia. But I'm interested, I know you have a few slides, and interesting slides like Brendan's. You know, despite significant achievements within the vaccine rollout, we're only at 11-12%, right, of global population that's received only one dose. So, you know, talk to me a little bit about, you know, not only what DHL is doing, has done, but some of the challenges ahead and some of the preparations you're putting in place.
Yes, thank you, Steve, and hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Is that going good? Yeah? All right. If you could go to the slide. Well, thank you for having me here, and happy to show you a little bit of what DHL has been doing in the past 12 months to help to support the fight against this pandemic, and also to give you a little bit of a perspective what we believe what is coming to us in the next couple of months, and how we can effectively fight against it. And when Cindy says this is year number 3 already, Nicole said this is year number 3 already, there are some days where I said, okay, this is Groundhog Day again, right? Been there, done this, and now it's coming back as well. But let's go to the first slide. Gives you a little bit of an overview of what have we been doing since we started to ship the first approved vaccine pretty much about 12 months ago. So the slide now shows that we have shipped 1.5 billion. Actually, since I've handed that in, we reached 1.6 billion to more than 170 countries now. And DHL is heavily engaged basically with all approved vaccine manufacturers and shipping the goods to all continents, to more than 170 countries. But next to vaccines, we basically ship also all of the other needed goods. We see that a lot of countries, especially in Africa, you have sometimes situations that the vaccine is there, but the ancillaries, the needle and syringes are missing. So we're also supporting NGOs and other parties and governments in shipping in needles and syringes into these destinations as well. And basically, before we shipped vaccines, we were heavily engaged in shipping also PPE material from China to all parts of the world as well. There are a couple of obviously big pharma companies that are now involved in vaccine manufacturing and distribution, but there are also smaller ones, and we help them in defining end-to-end solutions where companies not even have, you know, a full supply chain team on the ground covering all temperature regimes, because -70 was new to us. We shipped -70 before, but only in small fractions in clinical trials. But with the usage of dry ice, obviously a lot of things need to be taken into consideration, and with our close collaboration with IATA and with airlines and all partners, ground handlers, and so we are able to ship this now in big volumes. But I come back to that a little bit later on. Real-time tracking is also some of the trends we see that has come to the life science industry. I think a lot of partners were obviously used to use loggers, but more passive ones. Now active loggers are really something that we see more and more that is required. And obviously with all what we have been doing, security levels were very important, because when we started to ship out these vaccines, high concerns about theft, falsification, and so forth. So a lot of work with governments, with companies, security organizations has taken place there as well. On the next page, you see basically where we're coming from. This gives you a little bit of an overview of our life science sector within Deutsche Post DHL, where we have more than 9,000 people being dedicated to the sector. And obviously, and that should be the topic for today, with our Thermonet, we cover basically the globe with certified solutions, and in close collaboration with airlines, airports, ground handlers, and so forth. But we really saw as well that what we had on the ground was not sufficient with some of the new requirements, talking about especially -70, -20 degrees requirements. So what we have been doing is we founded a task force something like 14 months ago, where we coordinate across our divisions and working closely together on one side with the manufacturers, but also on the receiving side with governments, with ministries of health, with NGOs, with alliances, to ship vaccines and ancillaries into these destinations. So in our network, we've upgraded in certain specific key areas, ultra-low freezers, we increased our dry ice capabilities and so forth. And that brought us basically in a position where we are right now. The other thing that we have been doing is we launched 2 white papers on this subject. One basically in September last year already, where we alluded on the challenges ahead of us, and one in May, where we are looking back after first 6 months of operations and the things we've learned and the things we foresee. And the next couple of pages show you a little bit what we believe, and this was launched in May, and I believe now every day you can see that in the news that, you know, politicians or scientists are talking about this. What are the further challenges ahead of us, and what we believe what needs to be done in order to master this again. So when we launched this slide first time in May, and by the way, these white papers are available on the internet as well. And when we launched the white paper, that the right, on the left side, the red bar, which shows now 8 billion doses administered to date globally, was only in less than 1 billion, because it was really ramping up time at that time. Now we're closer to the 10 billion, but you see on the right side that the distribution of vaccines across countries is obviously not equal. A lot of countries has really caught up and had high vaccination levels in their countries, but we still, and I'm living in Germany, and we were on a level of 65. We see this is not enough. We had huge numbers going into the 50,000s a day in the last 2 weeks. Luckily, it's now a little bit stagnating, but you see, you really need to have big numbers in order to increase herd immunity. And you see here that something like 110 countries are still below a vaccination rate of 50. On the other side, you see that the manufacturing of vaccines is very much concentrated. The vast volumes are still coming from 8 countries in the world, and only small 5% are scattered around other countries as well. So international transport and international air freight is important to basically to reach all of these destinations. Therefore, this close collaboration between manufacturers, governments, airlines, the IATA, and logistic service providers is very important. We believe that for the future, because the next slide shows you a little bit how the future will look like. Now you read about booster shots in the news, or you read about that there are vaccines now who are approved for little kids, and a lot of countries, vaccination of little kids and other groups have started. You still see that some people who were not convinced to get vaccinated, getting vaccinated. So we believe, and those numbers were published in May in our white paper, that the incremental volume on top of the first volume of mind-blowing 10 billion doses will likely be as well in the range of 7 to 9 billion doses. So that's volume that we all need to master, and it starts now with booster shots. Some countries even start thinking about the fourth shot that probably will come in spring or early summer next time to a lot of the population. So more volume will be transported and stored, manufactured. And the next slide gives you a view on how that will look like in the course of the next years. So the red bar, the baseline, is the 5 billion vaccines that are basically there on an average year because of measles, malaria, and other diseases where you get the regular, and the seasonal flu, of course, where you get regular vaccine supply. Now we have 21 with the peak of 10 billion plus vaccines coming to the globe. And then the next following years, we approximately say 7 to 9 billion in terms of booster shots and updates and so. So huge volumes. So we believe it will be very important to remain prepared, to also keep some logistics infrastructure and capacity in the pocket, and basically be prepared for that as it will come in certain waves as well. And the final slide shows some pillars of collaboration, what we believe is important in order to have an effective fight against the pandemic. I think in the last months, we have seen a lot of partnerships and collaborations. They need to stay in place. We need to still have global early warning systems. What has happened with Omicron, as it was called, coming out of South Africa, where they first saw that, but now it's basically in a lot of countries present, needs to be in place as well. We need to invest further in research and development to improve all of what we have around diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. And then in the middle pillar, you see basically that a lot of governments now already thought about what is the national containment all about and what are our escalation plans. What are we doing also in terms of connectivity and follow up on positive cases in the development of monitoring apps and so. And really also, and that is also where we are getting engaged, what is needed to have as in terms of emergency stockpiles, in terms of pandemic stocks, inventory, and so forth. So, and then lastly, basically is going back to the manufacturing industry. Do we have sufficient capacity to ramp up the production of vaccines, or maybe a vaccine that is tailor-made to a new variant, such as Omicron or any other pandemic and virus that may come? And how do we define really best the blueprint in research, in production, procurement for all of these different product categories? And a lot of them require a specific logistic solution where we need to work together. With that, I would like to close it and hand it back to you, Steve. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Thomas. Very insightful, and some good slides and some statistics there. Yeah, I mean, tremendously complex, especially with the so many different elements, but even lack of standardization in terms of governments of even even in terms of passenger flights, not just in terms of cargo and moving things around the world. Very challenging. Well, I want to move us to our question and answer session now, sort of more of the roundtable discussion. So a quick reminder to attendees, please type in your questions and we'll start addressing those. I do have a couple of questions that were submitted in advance of the session from some registered attendees. So why don't I kick off with one of those, and then as we go ahead, we'll address other questions. Brendan, looking forward, what do you think will sort of be important for the sector in the coming months, and what does the horizon look like?
I think Thomas actually touched on them. So really, really critical is what we've built up until now. So all of the connections, all of the the air bridges, the partnerships that have been formed in the development and in the pre-movement and during the movement of all of these vaccines and all the healthcare products around it, that has to continue. It's not the kind of thing that we can just take our foot off the gas and let it subside. It's absolutely critical that we continue that cooperation and collaboration. Equally, we've made a lot of inroads as an industry on a lot of efficiencies, right? So digitalization, paperwork, customs organizations, the World Customs Organization actually identified the list of products that needed to be streamlined through borders. We really can't go backwards either on any of these things. So we can't go and start having all kinds of paperwork that we weren't using before. We'd move towards more digital practices. All of those, we need to learn from what we've accomplished over the last period and leverage it moving forwards. I think looking forwards, the future is that air travel will not return to 100%, so to its 2019 levels immediately. This will take some time, which means that what routes are available will continue to be constrained, whether the capacity is there, whether it's belly space or freighter or cargo only will again continue to be constrained. So these are things that really are solved through early and regular cooperation between the partners. And I know that we're on a discussion here about this very important sector, but there are other sectors in air cargo which are obviously trying to access the capacity that exists. So there's huge growth in e-commerce, and these are all going to compete, right? Especially around peak periods of the year, which is very natural. But that's why I say it's really, really important to not lose sight of what we've built up, so that all the partnerships, all the connections, and all the efficiencies, and to continue to move those along as we move forwards, because it's not going to go away. We will have boosters. It does seem like that will be there, but we'll also have other medicines that need to be deployed and moved around. And probably the other is we will have another pandemic of some form. They come in, regular waves. So every 10 or so years, we get something else. And so we need to prepare for that already as well, knowing that it will not look like this last one. And we kind of have to be ready and resilient as we were during this pandemic.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a rather sobering, depressing thought, right? But you're right.
Sorry.
We need to, yeah, so that's okay. We need to be prepared for these things. And I know that IATA has done a great job, and under your leadership, has helped pull together all the different actors, and even things like I've seen taking the seats out of aircraft and putting the straps in and putting the boxes into passenger planes. That's not, you don't just wake up one day and start doing that. I know IATA's been instrumental in making sure that all the standardization and vaccine movements and what you will. So thank you, Brendan, for everything you're doing. Nicole, with again, sort of the same similar sort of horizon question, but what should the response humanitarian sector be aware of, in your mind, and what sort of things are you planning, or have you had to adapt over the last little while?
I think that I talked a little bit about the constraints that we have as a passenger airline earlier, and we're a US-based carrier, so just the rules. Brendan's very familiar with this, and everybody else on the call. Unlike DHL, we're not able to operate sort of international point to international point. Really is everything's got to be to and from points in the US. So that is one challenge for us. In trying to do more with the COVAX initiative, we were very limited just based on the logistically where the warehouses for a lot of these vaccines were located. They were just not, they were not a very good fit for our particular network. So, we are limited by the scope of our network and the type of equipment that we fly. I saw in the chat earlier, someone mentioned Kentucky, right? So we know that there's all kinds of relief efforts going on right now for the massive tornadoes that hit the Midwest over the weekend. A real-time challenge for us is that a lot of the locations where they need the supplies the most are United Express. So we're not flying jets into those markets. So we're really very challenged in our ability to help there. So, where we have to sort of be flexible, and I think working with partners like you, and you know this all too well, Steve, and I think your team does, a lot of times what we'll have to do is look for a hub location and look at what trucking looks like as well, because that might be a more efficient way to get things there. So I think, looking at all of the different ways that we can complement or be a part of the chain, if you will, versus, sort of a direct point-to-point provider of the cargo movement is where we can be a part of it to get it positioned into a better place. I also think that, as over time, and I think what the pandemic really sort of taught us is just being able to navigate what the most urgent needs are. And that's part of where you're most helpful to us as a partner. I mentioned earlier, we try very hard not to displace revenue cargo, because that allows us to bring on more and to provide more free services later. And not everything is 100% free to the shippers as well, right? Because we can provide the air cargo portion of it, but there's still the whole matter of freight forwarders, where we have to deal only with known shippers. So these are all, I won't say, I don't want to call them limitations, but they really quite literally are, right? So we're only able to work through certain types of shippers, but looking at the whole landscape of what we have available to provide in terms of those services, but also being able to prioritize what's most important. I mean, I can tell you during the India COVID response, people were sending us we're willing to donate lots of things. I mean, it's like any other disaster, right? Everybody kind of wants to clean out their closets and feel good about making a donation. But the reality is we want to be able to focus on helping to get the most urgently needed supplies that we can fly to the destination. So, if people were sending us, gowns and latex gloves, that was less important than getting oxygen concentrators and other medications into a market. So, that's definitely something that we continue to sort of hone our communications on and really get to the heart of what's most urgently needed that we can efficiently ship as well. So we didn't, from a humanitarian perspective, didn't do as much around vaccinations because as everybody on this call is well aware, right, it's a very complex and delicate movement to do. And very risky at the end of the day for our business as well. So we tended to not take any request for vaccinations itself.
Yeah. Well, you guys have done a tremendous amount, and appreciate all your support. And that's right. I mean, it's a very challenging environment in which to respond. And Thomas, a question I have for you, and I think both Nicole and Brendan have touched on it. We're now reading about the supply chain challenges. It's in the newspapers very regularly, not just for vaccines, but more so high profile because people are worried about getting their Christmas presents or holiday presents, right? And so not that they don't care about the vaccines and the other things, but that's what's giving it high profile. All this e-commerce while we're all sat at home and ordering on our phones. So, and you hear about the delays at the ports, the problems with trucking, finding drivers. So how does this all play out and sort of rebalance, normalize, and does it ever normalize?
I think that's the $1 million question. Obviously, we as a company in doing logistics across 220 countries and across all different transport modes, we see that basically each and everywhere. We see that with the amount of parcels in our network, especially there where we are a domestic parcel provider as well. And it started already back in spring this year, when most of the countries went into a hard lockdown, we had like Christmas level parcels in the German network, for instance. Obviously, we now see the congestion issues with all of what is basically coming after Evergreen in the Suez Canal and the blockage of the Chinese ports. Obviously, we're trying to help our customers with charter flights as well. We see a lot of commodities that were normally going on ocean freight go on air freight as well. And yes, I mean, there is high demand and little capacity and the prices are going up. Will that ever relax? I mean, with some of the people in our product divisions who doing the forecast, most of them see 2022 still as a very tight situation. And if there is some relief, then it's probably at the start or mid to 23 as well. So talking about basically all commodities, but we see obviously shortages of semiconductors and everywhere, and high usage of air freight as well. And I see Brandon nodding as well, right? So I think the next 12 to 18 months probably remain relatively unchanged and tough as well. When it comes to vaccines, we see continuation of demand and operation going into the next year as well. I think on our side, what was always very new in the first half of this year and first time shipments to certain countries has become more and more normal in a way, which is good. Brandon mentioned the work of the World Customs Organization and the list of critical items, and we participated in that project work as well. We saw a lot of hype with first-time shipments into certain countries where the yellow plane was landing and there was the president or the minister of health, 30 journalists, a music chapel, and on the other side of the tarmac there was either a police or military convoy. And product never got stuck in customs and was rushing through the airport as well. But we said, okay, how about the 5th, the 10th, 20th shipment when there is no president, no music chapel? Will that be also go with the same speed to customs? Yes or no? And therefore our contribution to that work. But I believe what really has shown as well in the last couple of months is the attention supply chain and logistics has as a sector, where it was maybe not so much attractive as a job for young graduates. Now we see basically a lot of people say, hey, maybe I put myself into a supply chain career as well. And then you mentioned, Steve, driver shortage. Yes, I think that is a big problem in a lot of countries when it comes to domestic or cross-border trucking. One of the things we're doing, for instance, as a company is we work also well with refugee organizations because there's a lot of talent coming from LMIC countries into parts of the Western world, and we see whether we have there a good fit between our demand in warehouses as drivers and what is coming basically from the marketplace from this group of people who want to basically continue the life in the Western world.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. Brendan, you know, I'm interested, sort of related to that and sort of long-term horizon. And you know, maybe Nicole and Thomas, you may have a view on this as well. I do see a little bit in sort of the sector that it appears that a number of carriers are looking to purchase new freighter aircraft, and sort of freighter aircraft sales are up. So I guess that would be an indication that most carriers see that this is going to go on for some time. And that's something they need to do in order to be able to meet the demand.
So they certainly see the focus on air cargo as being something that will continue. You know, there's a lot of either conversion purchases because there's some available feedstock where they don't see the passenger market coming back online fully for some period of time. In some cases, that's because they actually would prefer to use different aircraft on those routes, and so they're kind of cycling out maybe older aircraft, you know, as they may be dormant for some period of time, and rather than bring them back in as older passenger aircraft, they can turn them into cargo aircraft. All of those point to the fact that that's not the kind of investment that people make if they think it's a 2-year sort of boom. I think the situation that we find ourselves in today will continue for some period, so 12, 18 months, give or take, as Thomas mentioned. Could be a little bit longer for some commodities, especially with manufacturing issues the way they are. And it depends a little bit on what their reliance is on the various modes of transport, because some of the disruptions that we see in the maritime space may not fix itself as easily, without quite a lot of applied resource. So, but air cargo is experiencing a growth period, and all of the short-term and medium-term signs point to continued growth, and that's a very good thing for air cargo, I think. And I think the challenge in the sector that you are in is that capacity hasn't returned to its 2019 levels, and we have a global pandemic as well as many other local, community and crisis situations that continue to occur. So it really puts a lot of pressure, I think, on what we have today. And some of the responses that were deployed, so passenger freighters, as some people call them, so passenger aircraft being used for cargo operations. These are non-normal operations, so they're not the easiest thing to turn around. Airlines were able to do so in a very short period of time, thanks to very cooperative governments, but a lot of those exemptions are actually ending. So in the United States, that will end. In EASA, it's time bound to the aircraft flight hours. In China, it ends at the end of this year. And there isn't, a lot of interest in continuing that, one, because it's non-normal operations, and two, because we're really hoping that the passenger business can start to come back online and actually help supplement that. So, as we continue to be constrained, airlines will have to continue to look at different ways of offering resilient services to the members, to their customers, and then offering, even extra sort of emergency relief type services to them. So I think that's what's on our kind of short-term horizon to even into the medium term.
Yeah. I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, I know that's interesting about the passenger conversions. I mean, what do they take, 5-6 hours to load one of those things by hand, some of that cargo, and then the same amount of time to offload as well? That's probably not sustainable, huh?
So in the early days, that's certainly what it was, but they were all hand loaded one by one, and very quickly people started to, in fact, there were semi-autonomous conveyor belts that were being deployed that could kind of snake through. There were some potential innovations around maybe even cabin containers, so cabin ULDs of sorts. It never quite made it to full-scale deployment, but very quickly, I think a lot of airlines looked at this and said, if we're going to have to do this, we need to do it properly. I don't want my people leaning over the seats with heavy boxes and so on. So we need to find the most efficient way of doing it. And that loading time came down very, very quickly for many airlines, especially if you were able to remove the seats and you have a little bit more,
Sure.
operating margin, and where you were reducing how much you could actually load. So as long as you kept it light, loading times were able to speed up. But it's a very manual process, and it requires your people to be very sort of on top of things, which was a challenge throughout the pandemic. They were, you mentioned, the people impact, the driver shortages, and we as people, as society as a whole, we were really impacted through this pandemic, and trying to ask more of our staff as it's challenging, but they were all really there to step up, I would say. What I've seen from around the globe, all the different stories from all the different airlines, ground handlers, the people are really kind of stepping up and making sure that they'll load that aircraft 2-3 hours faster if you give them the right tools and techniques, and they'll get there for you. So that's been really inspiring, actually.
Yeah.
I would say, just picking up from what you were just saying, Brendan, the people for sure have shown up like every single day and then some throughout this pandemic. One of the things that I think as we look forward, and I think as we've gone through the pandemic too, is managing expectations around how quickly we can help with shipments as well, right? So all of ours is done on rather space available basis. So we may not be able to send, all 50 skids of what you've got in one load, But over the course of several days and several flights, we can probably get that accommodated. So where people are willing to be flexible as well, to your point, our people are finding a way, even if it's, you know, piecemeal and a couple here and a couple there until it's all done, with the commitment still being there to support. I will also add to this, you know, helping where we can doesn't always necessarily mean a seat on a plane or, you know, some room in the belly either. I think equally as important for us as a passenger airline is our ability to connect with our customers as well, to provide monetary support. One of the things that I will mention that I didn't mention earlier is unique to what we did early on in the pandemic with one of our corporate clients. You know, a lot of our corporate clients weren't flying anywhere. The business travel, obviously we want business travel to come back, but we were able to convert some unused travel credits from corporate customers to real-time dollars for Airlink, in particular to utilize in their pandemic response. So we had, you know, quite a large gift from a consulting partner. Steve, I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, but, you know, with that, I think made a big difference in this current year that we're coming to a close on, with the ability to use those travel credits real time to deploy resources and provide seats for individuals to different disaster areas.
Yeah, no, thanks, Nicole. That's right. That's really important. And, you know, I think the thing we shouldn't forget is that, you know, all of our colleagues out there we're also first responders, right? They continue to operate, continue to respond. They may not have had a medical badge on. And you know, yes, you know, great creativity from yourselves in terms of getting some of your corporate customers to help support the movement of passengers and cargo. I really appreciate that. Well, we're almost up on time now, and I guess just one sort of closing question, perhaps to each of you. I mean, you know, talk to me, Thomas. Maybe let's start with you. You know, what have you been, you know, most proud of in terms of your, you know, your response COVID-19, and what are you feeling most optimistic about?
Well, thank you, Steve. I mean, most proud of is probably really the fact that we could pull this together in a short period of time and pull this together in a very complex organization. And DHL is a large company of all different business units and our organizations in the different countries. But this goes well beyond our company with our customers, our traditional customers on the manufacturing side, all of our partners, be it airlines, ground handlers, packaging material suppliers, because obviously that was very important as well. And then new detected customers on the NGO and public sector side, that we really could make this, that not so much went wrong in a way that we had only little delays or temperature excursions. Really, everyone was all hands on deck and basically gave the best, as Nicole said that as well, so that we've made it. And I believe if we continue to do so, that leads over to your second question. I'm very optimistic that we can fight this pandemic, because the weapon for it is really getting as many people vaccinated around the world as possible quickly now in the next 6 to 9 months or so.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. Brendan?
So in terms of most proud, so looking at the industry as a whole, seeing how well they came together, seeing how quickly they came together on a variety of different fronts, be that coordination, you know, on the vaccine side, what are we going to move, when and how, from where, you know, very quickly coming together and successfully moving those vaccines around the world in the largest coordinated vaccine movement globally ever. That's it. I mean, to me, that's something the industry can pat itself on the back for. It's done and continues to do extremely well. And leading into the second part, the reality is a lot of governments have said that vaccination is sort of the way that they're going to manage the situation on an ongoing basis. That's the way they're going to open up their borders. That's the way they're going to manage the risk. And so air cargo is, you know, going to be in a position to, you know, continue to do what it has done and what air cargo does actually really, really well, and actually help aviation restart, right? And it's going to play a huge role in not just, you know, the societal part, which I think is huge, but also in helping aviation restart as a whole. So really stimulating the rest of the sector, if you want to call it that way. And I think that's also something really, you know, very good to look forwards to.
Thanks, Brendan. Nicole?
Yeah, just I think most proud is really the collaborations we've been able to be a part of in delivering supplies that are most needed when they're needed, and doing that in a rather efficient way, and where we've been able to make the biggest difference. It's not everywhere, but it shouldn't be either. So I would say looking forward, though, I think we're going to continue to look for ways to be innovative with our ability to respond, especially in those cases where we may not be able to, you know, fly something in, but maybe looking to focus a little bit more on developing more partnerships, either with freight forwarders or trucking companies, and through these partnerships as well, and looking for other funding sources through customer contributions to accommodate that. You know, doing what we can where we can, but bringing the right partners to the table, I think, is just so key and important to our sort of collective ability to continue to make a real positive contribution to the response efforts worldwide.
That's great. Well, thanks so much, Nicole. You guys certainly are leaders on many fronts, many levels, and we appreciate your partnership, your support. We appreciate the partnership with DHL Thomas and Brendan with IATA. So thank you everybody for joining me today. I think we're up on time. Thanks to all of the attendees. We're going to share the recorded session with many more individuals around the world, and have a good rest of your day. Thanks everybody.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.